questions. The forum is being live streamed and you'll be able to see it on the library site. There are a few ground rules. Please turn off your cell phones, your cameras, and hold your applause until the end of the debate. Each candidate will give a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. For the questions, candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions with the chance for a 15-second rebuttal of a fact, not a new item. So let us start with the elephant in the fiscal room, the pensions. In January, when one of you is inaugurated, you will face this elephant. The voters passed a pension obligation bond to ward off bankruptcy, but the bond was predicated on low interest rates. Interest rates are higher, and yesterday the Wall Street Journal interviewed a slew of bankers, and nobody expected interest rates to fall by this winter. So what is your plan B? Actually, I've forgotten the opening statements. We should do them. Should we dive into the questions, or do you want your opening statements? Yes. Opening statements? Okay, Brett.
Great.
Mr. Smiley.
Brett is fine, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking the time. The election's just 12 days away, and so to take a moment to meet all three of us tonight really is so important in this election, and I appreciate it. My name is Brett Smiley, and I'm excited to be running in this year's election for mayor of our great city. Providence has all of the ingredients to be a world-class city. It also has the potential to be the best-run city in the country by getting back to basics and focusing on what matters. And that's what my campaign's all about. After having served as the city's first chief operating officer, chief of staff to Governor Raimondo, and the state's director of administration through the worst days of the pandemic, I've had a chance to see what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to be fixed. And my campaign is focused on starting with delivering quality city services, fixing things the right way the first time. Everything from better snow removal to finally fixing streets and sidewalks to running a better city. But being the best run city in the country also means having the best run school system in the country. I'm sure we're going to talk more about schools tonight, but we're 2 years into a state takeover that's not yet yielding results for our parents and students. We need to get the takeover back on track and have a school system that can actually move the needle for student performance for families in Providence. Finally, I'm focused on restoring a sense of public safety to our city through a restoration of actual community policing, investment in opportunities for young people to get at some of the root causes of the challenges in our community. I'm confident that we can have a safe city with great public schools and excellent public services by getting back to the basics and focusing on what matters in city government, quality of life in all of our neighborhoods. That's why I'm running and asking for your vote tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Cuervo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Gonzalo Cuervo, and I'm running for mayor of Providence. I appreciate you all coming to listen to us. Like Brett and like the councilwoman, we all love this city, and we realize that this city has remarkable assets, primarily its people, but also institutions, culinary scene, so many great things going for it. The reality is, however, that there are two ways to experience Providence. There's one experience for folks that are doing well and folks that are upwardly mobile and who can afford the amenities and the great things that are available to folks in Providence. And there's another experience, another reality for people who are barely getting by and who continue to be squeezed by an economy and pushed out of their own homes because of increasingly unaffordable housing and a tax structure that just doesn't give anybody a break. The problem with that growing inequality, that growing gap between these two realities is that even those of us who are doing well are impacted by it. Because when we talk about the delivery of city services, when we talk about keeping our streets safe and clean, when we talk about improving our schools, all these things require our tax base to grow. And our tax base is not growing when more and more of our families are just barely getting by. I'm running for mayor because I have the combined experience of having been a community organizer beginning at age 19, working with a number of organizations, institutions, and people across the city to really build a consensus, move community forward, create opportunities. And I also have the leadership experience in government. I spent more than a decade in city government I was part of the team that worked with Dean Esserman on community policing. I was part of the team, along with Linda Kushner and so many other of your colleagues, that helped save these community libraries when the Central Library wanted to sell this building. I've been there. I've done the work. I've also been Deputy Secretary of State and successfully navigated the legislative process, and I want to bring these experiences to the mayor's office so that we can bring people together to actually get things done.
Thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for having me here. My name is Neerville Fortune. I'm a Providence City Councilwoman, and I grew up right here in Providence and a proud product of our public schools. This week, I actually dropped my daughter off at Nathan Bishop, and she's a 7th grader, and my son is a rising junior in college. I grew up in the city of Providence. I come from an immigrant family. My family moved here from Haiti, escaping a dictatorship. But unfortunately, due to poor immigration policies that still exist today, I was separated from my family. But when I joined them, I grew up on the West End, South Side, and Washington Park neighborhood. And my parents have been living in the same house for over 31 years. But now I represent Ward 3 in Providence. And what's interesting is that my mom actually worked in someone's home when I was growing up, when I was a kid, as a CNA worker. What we need in Providence is a mayor that has the professional and lived experience to move our city forward. A mayor that understands what it means to be in our public schools, have gone through the system, but also the background to create policies to address the challenges that our families, our students face. We need a mayor who's going to address the affordability crisis to ensure that every single person who's living here can afford to live in the city, whether you're low income to moderate income, whether you're aging, or people who don't have an income or are unhoused to transition to permanent housing. We need a mayor who's going to ensure that our city is safe. We can respond to violent crimes, but also prevent it, but also ensure we're not criminalizing people if they're experiencing a behavioral health crisis. That's why I led the effort to create the first behavioral health entity or crisis response initiative in the city of Providence. And finally, we need a mayor that's going to work for the people, a mayor that we can trust, that's going to take care of the basics, picking up the trash, fixing your sidewalk, sweeping the streets on a regular basis. So I look forward to our conversation to talk about the issues that matter to all of us. And it is truly with great honor and privilege to be sitting here to run to be the first woman mayor in our capital city.
Thank you. Now we can go into the heart of the matter. The fiscal elephant, we're starting with Mr. Cuervo. Interest rates are remaining high. Nobody expects them to fall. The pension bond was supposed to save us from bankruptcy. What is your plan B?
So I think the pension bond, thankfully, had some safeguards put into place, and one of them was that the total cost of borrowing could not exceed 4.9%. It's pretty clear that we've exceeded that with current interest rates. And that's good because some pension bonds in the past in other areas of the country have failed because the spread between the rate of return and the cost of the borrowing was so close that any fluctuations in the market would basically have us paying a double debt. That's unacceptable. What we need to do is we need to hold the line and make sure that we're fiscally responsible. We need to grow the city's economy through aggressive economic development, through home construction, and we need to hold our large institutional nonprofits accountable so they're paying their fair share. Through a systemic approach of growing the city's economy, we can overcome the fact that our annual pension payment is increasing at a rate higher than the city's tax base is growing. There are no simple solutions. Unfortunately, there are no satisfying solutions. This is what we have to do, and over time we'll be able to reach a point of funding that will be adequate enough that we will be able to look at options like getting into the state retirement system.
Thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune, your
so-
plan B.
Great. So we actually have 5 years to be able to take out this pension obligation bond as long as the market is favorable to the city. Right now, we are in a real fiscal crisis. The pension is only about 23% funded. We want to get it out of critical state to get it over 60% funded. Luckily, in 2018, I worked on a pension report with my former council colleague, Sam Zurier, outlining tools, and it didn't include the pension obligation bond, but tools to address the pension crisis. One, it includes looking at a plan to transition into into the state pension system, but we have to do it responsibly. Two, looking at our city assets, also growing our tax base. But to grow our tax base, we also have to have better schools so people want to live here, and holding our nonprofits accountable so they can pay taxes on their fair share. And also looking at a hybrid model and getting some of our employees, negotiating the contracts as we recently did, to have employees to pay a little bit more into the pension system. But we have multiple tools in the toolbox. It's outlined in the 2018 pension report, in which I worked on, and that gives us options to address the pension crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smiley, your plan B.
I've been an advocate for the last year or more to get into the state system, and as State Director of Administration, I sat on the State Investment Commission. Right now in Providence, we have our own pension fund. We pay our own lawyers, our own bankers, our own fiscal advisors to get the same advice that the state gets. It's just one more contract the mayor gets to give out. And it's a waste on the system. Because we're so poorly funded, we don't have access to certain investment products. We also keep a disproportionate share of the fund in cash to meet our cash flow needs, and we don't make any money on our money. I think we should be working to negotiate our way into the state system to save those transaction costs and then probably most importantly, because the biggest driver of how we're in this problem in the first place is that past mayors, mostly Mayor Cianci, skipped payments. And the compounding effect of 30 years of skipped payments is $1 billion. Were we in the state system, we could say to our kids and grandkids that would never happen again, because state entities, the state would deduct city aid to make sure the city always made its payment, and then we could once and for all say this wouldn't happen again.
Thank you. The next question comes from someone in both audiences, last time and this time, saving the Superman building. The current proposal calls for a total $67 million subsidy, with $5 million from the city, a 30-year tax stabilization agreement, and a $10 million bond. Would you agree to that? Let's start with Councilwoman LaFortune.
So that ordinance is supposed to come to City Council. One of the things that is outlined is that 20% of the units are supposed to be allocated to affordable housing. Right now, it's at 80% AMI, average median income. I think that's a little too high, and it's not truly affordable, because if you think about it, the average teacher or city employee, librarian, wouldn't be able to live in there. So as a city council person, one, I do want to see that building restored. It's been sitting dormant for quite some time, and I do think that it will transform that whole downtown area. But we also need to ensure that we're addressing our housing crisis. And if there's going to be 20% affordable housing, they should be truly affordable. And this is also an opportunity for us to push my residential TSA, which calls for any development that is in the city of Providence who are receiving a tax stabilization agreement to ensure that a certain percentage of their units are affordable housing units, and it would be based on the average median income.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Smiley, would you agree to that kind of subsidy?
With adequate taxpayer protections, yes, I do. I think we should be moving forward. You know, Governor Raimondo, her team, I had a chance to be in several of the negotiations. We got really close to major corporations that were thinking about relocating. Corporate headquarter relocations are not happening right now. Most corporations are actually trying to get out of office space and not sign up for new office space. I think housing is the right answer for the building. Demolition of that building is not an option to me. It's iconic and an important part of our skyline, and subsidy is going to be required. But so long as we can protect the taxpayers by making sure that the building owner doesn't do to the city of Providence what's happening with the soccer stadium in Pawtucket right now, where they come back for more money later, and we sign an agreement that says this is the subsidy, no more. You don't get the money until the building's actually occupied and finished. It is a program that I support, and after 9 years of being dark on the landscape, I'm looking forward to seeing that building lit up again.
Okay. The next question.
Hello.
Mr. Cuervo. Mr.
Yes.
Cuervo. Yeah.
So I think it's great that the Superman building will be redeveloped and 288 housing units will be created there. I'm very concerned, and I was concerned. I actually published an op-ed about this. I'm very concerned that the city has agreed to what I believe are incredibly generous and unrealistic conditions. Those $10 million that we're giving from the Affordable Housing Trust is about 40% of the money we borrowed in that trust. We borrowed that trust at market rates, and we're going to turn around and loan that to a private developer at 1% annual for 40 years. You taxpayers, we are paying the difference. We promised a $5 million cash payment, and at the end of the last council session, the city council miraculously opened a sock drawer somewhere and found $5 million. That's more than what the city spends every year fixing roads. That to me is unacceptable. Of course, the Superman building, redeveloping it is important, it's great, but we really have to look at other ways. We should not be spending $10 million that were created and destined for affordable housing on that building when Housing Works was quoted in WPRI saying that there were only really going to be 14 truly affordable units in that whole building.
Thank you.
Actually, I have 15
seconds.
That is
Sure.
incorrect. 14 building units. That is not correct because the total number of building units, and if you take away the 20%, that would make it more than just 14 units. But again, it has to be, the 20% has to be truly affordable. And that's why the trust fund was developed, to ensure that we're building more affordable housing opportunities.
And I would tend to believe what Housing Works Rhode Island has to say.
Okay, well, let's move on to a less contentious subject, the library. We'll start with Mr. Smiley. We all know that the libraries are wonderful anchors of community. We all know that they do amazing work with poor funding, and we all know you love them, so we don't need to hear that from all of you. What, as mayor, would you do to strengthen them? Let's start with Mr. Smiley.
Yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate you assuming on, but we do all love the libraries, and I think, you know, really more importantly, through the pandemic, like so many assets in the city and in society in general, we saw how critical they were. We saw what a resource it is, and so I think going forward, what's most important is that we support the libraries to be able to continue to meet the growing need and demand of our libraries. That includes things like nighttime hours, weekend hours, additional both adult education opportunities, but also after-school programming for students. Our libraries are so much more than a place to get books, and the city should see them as an extension of the services that we provide in the community: educational, enrichment, gathering places where now we have remote workers. I know there's now Wi-Fi outside here, and I see people who are working at their remote job outside the Rochambeau Library, and so we need to embrace them and support them to grow to meet that growing demand post-pandemic.
Mr. Cuervo?
Yes, libraries are an incredible resource, especially because as time goes by and we move away from libraries being repositories of books, and we move more towards programming and more towards community building and other ways of transferring information to folks, libraries are playing an increasingly important role. I served on the board of the community libraries for years, very difficult years, when the whole separation from the central library happened. And those were very challenging years, and it was inspiring to see how the board and the staff sacrificed and really fought to preserve the 9 libraries. I think there's an opportunity for us to build on that. The libraries need more funding. There's greater opportunities for partnerships. One of the plans that I have is to create neighborhood opportunity zones for economic development and center them around the 9 libraries so that not only can people come here and learn and use the resources, local business people can come here and meet with city officials and third parties to build up their businesses and to create greater economic opportunity and wealth.
Thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune.
Well, I haven't sat on the board for the libraries, but I've been a big advocate for the libraries, particularly the Providence Community Libraries. My brother has been teaching chess for over 10 years at Washington Park Library. Both of my children have gone through this library as well as the Washington Park Neighborhood Library. I've been a strong advocate to ensure that we get more funding for the libraries. They continue to be level funded. We know that they are anchors in the community. Libraries play a significant role in providing kids access to technology, computer, homework help, books, being able to take out their books. So we do need to continue to fund the libraries, and as mayor, I would work with our community libraries to ensure that it's a true partnership in which we can get some resources for the libraries so that they can thrive and we can grow the programming that currently exists. And I also think there needs to be a better partnership with the libraries as with the schools as well.
Thank you. The next question should be easy and take just 10 seconds. We'll start with Mr. Cuervo. The Johns Hopkins study gave the city school system an F, prompting the state takeover. What would you give the state several years down the pike? What grade? A, B, C, D, E?
I would give the state takeover a C-. I think there are some things that you can't control, namely a global pandemic. But there are other opportunities that to improve and to affect change and to change systems, and we haven't seen that happen. What we've seen is this takeover has effectively just added an additional layer of bureaucracy to a process that was already quite stifled. And it's become frustrating for parents who lost many of the mechanisms they had for engagement. It's frustrating for students. It's particularly frustrating for teachers and administrators, everybody. And I think the reality is that we need a big reset, and we need an opportunity to get out of this model, bring it back to local control, and effect a change that brings consistency and accountability across the board.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune, what grade would you give the state?
Well, I think it's very difficult for someone to give a grade when they haven't been a part of it. I've been a parent. I've been through this whole takeover, and I've also been quite active in providing input and being a part of the process to make our schools better. I'm the only candidate that not only has a child in our schools, but also has a graduate degree in urban education policy, and the only person who also has a comprehensive educational plan for our system. It's been disastrous.
So
I
what
think
grade?
the grade that I would give would definitely be not a passing. It would probably be a D-. I won't fail it, because there has been a lot of input from parents and contributions with our partners, and there's been a lot of work, and we do have the turnaround plan that outlines the goals. What we need is the path forward, and what my plan does is provides a path forward and addresses some of the goals, many of the goals that we're trying to meet in the turnaround plan, like increasing our teachers. My plan has a teacher residency program, getting some additional funding, looking at the funding formula to weigh for multi-language learners, creating an apprenticeship program, and also investing in after-school opportunities
Thank
and
you.
year-round
Thank you.
opportunities as well.
So we've gone from F to D-. Mr. Smiley, what grade would you give the state takeover?
It's an incomplete.
Okay.
We're 3 years into a 5-year turnaround. 2 of those 3 years were entirely focused on remote learning, getting kids back in school, testing, masking, just getting through it like everyone else. And so I don't think it's fair to give a grade yet. We haven't had a chance to actually move the work forward. The state has 2 years left on the initial term. As mayor, I want to work with the next governor, whoever that might be, to get the takeover back on track. I don't want to actually start over with a new plan. One of the fundamental problems with our failures in education in Rhode Island has been the constant change and our inability to actually finish any of the plans in our school system. So I think we need to finish what we started, give it a chance. Hopefully we can do that in the next 2 years, in the initial 5 years. But in the first 3 years, we faced a global pandemic. We lost the governor that started the whole thing. We lost yet another superintendent, so it's incomplete.
So may I want to use my 15 seconds. Is
15
that okay?
seconds.
All right.
Rebuttal of a fact.
Okay. Well, this is the thing. A lot of the issues that like we saw during the pandemic were issues that existed within our public educational system for quite some time. Our failing buildings that have been crumbling. I worked on the Fix Our School campaign. The lack of technology so that things are accessible to our students. The shortage of teachers. We've been talking about shortage of teachers for years, and there isn't a real mechanism at the state or city level. So it has existed.
Thank you.
I agree that those problems pre-existed the pandemic, but for 2 years, we weren't building schools. Nobody was doing anything. We weren't recruiting and hiring new teachers. We were trying to retain the ones that we had because people were scared to go to work. I think we should be really proud that in Rhode Island, when I was working with Governor Raimondo and the entire team, that we were one of the first states in the country to get students back in the classroom, that we were one of the first states in the country to have in-person learning, and that's a great accomplishment that we should be proud of.
But we got students back in the classroom, and yet there weren't filters. Kids were literally getting sick and being sent home in teachers. So we can't stick to that if the infrastructure was poor.
Thank you. This is still on education. We'll start with you, Councilwoman LaFortune. The city has a problem hiring and retaining teachers of all sorts, particularly bilingual teachers in a system where 2/3 of students are Hispanic. Your solution?
So many of our students are multi-language learners, and in fact, we have teachers who are Spanish teachers, and there's this assumption that all kids who come from Spanish-speaking countries or Latin America, they speak Spanish, but the reality is some of them speak indigenous languages that even the teachers cannot teach. So there are a couple of things. One, part of my plan is to create a teacher residency program, and we're not recreating the wheel. We're not creating a new plan. There's actually a teacher academy at Mount Pleasant High School since I went to Mount Pleasant High School that has never been funded. We should be working with Rick, our other institutions, to really create a homegrown teacher residency program where we're producing teachers of color who are more effective and stay in the field. We also need to look at the funding formula and provide funding so teachers can get MLL, multi-language learner certification. That's part of my plan as well. But we also need to support our teachers of color, and the mayor should be working with the state to make it easier when teachers from Massachusetts or Connecticut are trying to teach in Providence and they can't.
Thank you. Mr. Smiley, hiring and retaining teachers.
Yeah, so using pandemic relief money, there's quite a few actually programs and incentives right now to hire new teachers of color and multi-language teachers. There are real challenges with retention. I've met so many teachers who tell me that the joy has been sucked out of their job, which is such a hard thing to hear because our teachers care deeply about our children. They're so important, but the love is gone, and it's a combination of the stress and strain from the pandemic, but also the negativity around the turnaround plan and the constant change. Every couple of years, there's a new superintendent. That superintendent comes in with their own theory for change, their own assessment. They push through a new curriculum, and our teachers feel like they have whiplash, and they just keep going through this like merry-go-round of change, and they don't feel like at the end of the day that it matters. And so what we need is stability and continuity. We need to respect the profession and provide a platform where we can say to our teachers that what you're doing matters. We're going to stay the course. The curriculum that we just rolled out last year is going to stay for a while, and you can start to master it, and that we appreciate what you're doing, and you're not going to be forced with this constant change.
Thank you. Mr. Cuervo, same question.
Yes.
How do you hire and retain teachers?
So hiring and retaining involves several things. There's a systemic issue with the actual process of hiring. My wife is a dual language certified teacher with 20 years of experience, and she was invited to apply for a position in Providence. They called her back for an interview 2.5 months later when she had already been hired somewhere else within days. That's a problem. That's a problem. We're letting good teachers slip through the cracks, and then we start the year with more than 100 vacancies. That is unacceptable. The other thing is the climate. Brett is right. Teachers are burnt out. We are incredibly critical of our teachers, and yet our teachers will leave one of our poor-performing schools and get hired by a high-performing district in the suburbs in 10 seconds. They got 3 job offers immediately. We have to change that culture. And the other thing is consistency. We need to have consistency in the way we manage the department and in the way we provide curriculums and in the way we treat not only our students but also our teachers. This is how we retain talent, and this is how we bring in good talent that will otherwise go to competing districts.
I just want to add, today I was endorsed by the teachers. Do we have 15 seconds?
To refute a fact.
Okay,
This is-
so the part of the issue is that both of you talked about the retention of the teachers and hiring teachers, but the reality is that the teachers have had a hard time just dealing with the structure that currently exists, and both of you have been in positions of power and have done nothing to change it, to make it easier for teachers to work in the city of Providence or to get certified. So the reality is nothing has been done on your part.
Thank you.
And neither of us have been a council person for 5 years.
And I've listed everything that I have done. Again, you have not been here. You were in Cranston. Let's be careful with that, sir.
Let's move on. I think that we all agree that teaching in Providence is not a walk in the park, to put it mildly. Okay, next question, starting with Mr. Smiley, that please, a yes or no, maybe. Should we give priority to city residents in hiring?
We should incentivize city employees to live in the city. If someone lives elsewhere but they want to move here, I don't think that should be a disqualifier. But I think we would be a stronger, better city if police officers, firefighters, teachers, and public employees were our neighbors. We can't require that by law, but I think we should incentivize them to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Cuervo.
I have a proposal to incentivize homeowner occupancy for city employees. We currently have firefighters and teachers that commute from Connecticut and Massachusetts to work here, and I think that's unacceptable. We should have as many people as possible living within our community. It builds community, it builds trust, and they are vested in the outcomes of our city.
Okay, Councilwoman LaFortune?
We actually have First Source that does prioritize residents of Providence. The police department has a program for police officers, future police officers who live in the city of Providence. Part of my plan is to have a loan forgiveness program or a low interest loan for city employees to be able to purchase homes in the city of Providence. But I do think we have incredible talent right here in our city, and it's a shame that people leave our city for good quality jobs, and they could be contributing to the communities that they're living in and serving in. So I would definitely work on elevating those incentive programs that currently exist, but also looking at creating new ones to prioritize people who live in the city of Providence.
Thank you. Now we go to something that I think is less controversial, maybe. We'll start with Mr. Cuervo on traffic calming, speed bumps, cameras, street carve-outs. Do you want more, fewer, or the same number? How do you feel about the bumps, the humps, the...
Yes. So the city developed a very comprehensive, great streets initiative. I think that's an important step forward. You know, we have grown up in an era that is incredibly car-centric, and our streets are ruled by cars. And so a lot of the planning and a lot of the thinking that we do around transportation is car-centric. I think there's an opportunity for us to understand that streets should be welcoming and safe for people who are walking, people who are on scooters, on bicycles, or on assistance devices. I think there are some areas where people clamor for significant traffic calming, and there are other areas where people woke up one day and there were 15 speed bumps, and they were surprised by that. So ultimately, this is about the city being effective in communicating with its residents and understanding what are the needs in every area, what is it that people need, what is it that they want, and what is the best way to address those, whether that means speed bumps, whether it means bump outs or other design elements that slow down traffic, or whether that may require speed cameras, which most people have a philosophical apprehension about.
Okay. Councilwoman LaFortune.
I have nightmares about speed bumps, especially after they appeared in our ward without a true process. I am a co-sponsor of the Green and Complete Streets initiatives. We do need to create streets that are multimodal, that are accessible to all, but also keep in mind the residents, our businesses. That is truly important to me as someone who takes the bus, rides my bike, but also drive and walk, you know, to patron our restaurants, to come to the library. So that's something that I will continue to work on to ensure that our streets are complete. And they're also green and accessible to all people who are trying to get around. But we do need to approach traffic calming a little bit better. Speed humps are not the only solutions. We should look at what other models or other places are doing to make our streets safer through signage, amongst other things. But the first solution should not always be speed humps. And I want to take a more comprehensive approach to making our streets much safer so that I don't have nightmares about those speed humps.
Okay. Mr. Smiley.
So pedestrian safety is of course very important to me, and traffic calming is important, but this is, you know, I talked in my opening about running a better city, fixing things the right way the first time. And the speed hump situation is a classic example. We all saw them get installed. They were too high. Then they got reinstalled. Then we've actually done a lot of paving over the last couple of months, so they've taken them out and then put them back in. So this is like our third or fourth round of the same speed hump in a city with severe underlying financial challenges. There was also really poor execution. So right around the corner on Rochambeau, the way they're built, it's supposed to be so that particularly public safety vehicles, fire trucks and ambulances can straddle them, but it never didn't occur to any city employee that people park on the side of the road on Rochambeau, so you can't actually straddle them if there's a car parked there. So we just have like chronically poor execution. There's more than one way to calm traffic. They've got the rubber speed humps like they have outside of the Whole Foods that are removable, that makes it easier for snow removal. We can do speed enforcement with the police, with cameras. I think we need to use a broader toolkit for traffic safety and do things the right way.
I think we can bury the humps and the bumps. The next question is truly ripped from today's headlines, and let's start with Councilwoman LaFortune. It's a housing question. Do you want to use the Triggs Golf Course for housing?
Triggs, that's a tough one. I went to school in Pleasant View, and it's the only real suitable golf course that we have in the city of Providence. But it is a large parcel of land, and so there is opportunity for us to look at the land, to look at some zoning policies, to see how we can add some additional housing opportunities there. But I also want to ensure that we have recreational options for our young people, our rising population, and people who do enjoy golf. But there's definitely some opportunities to think about building more affordable housing around that particular area, but still maintain the recreation component. And I think, golf is a great sport for our young people, and this is an opportunity to train some of our future Tiger Woods throughout the city of Providence.
Okay. Mr. Smiley?
No, I
Okay.
support keeping Triggs as it is. It's one of the only places that is affordable to play for city residents, and I don't think the neighborhood supports it, and I do not support changing Triggs.
Thank you. Mr. Cuervo?
So the idea of potentially developing housing at Triggs was mine, which I brought up during an interview in December of last year. Subsequently, I learned that that may be nearly impossible because of a number of deed restrictions tied to that land. And therefore, we dropped that idea from my housing proposal. Other communities have turned golf courses into neighborhoods. It's not a far-fetched idea, but the reality is we have a housing crisis that needs to be addressed immediately and not after 10 years of litigation and a whole bunch of very angry people sniping at each other. So currently, I would not support the development or the redevelopment of Triggs as a neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Now we go back to Mr. Smiley. Gang violence. What would you do to tamp it down?
So restoring a sense of safety to our community is a top priority of mine and one of the core platforms in my campaign. And we need to address it from both sides. We need better community policing in our city, but we also need to get at the root causes of why young people feel hopeless and without a future and get involved in life on the streets. So on the community policing side, I have supported an increase in the police department to levels that the chief says that he needs in order to do adequate community policing. That means officers permanently assigned to a geographic district so neighbors, community leaders can actually get to know their neighborhood police officers, the restoration of the walking beat, officers back on bicycles, and doing what we did 20 years ago. We've done this before as a community and it worked. On the other side, we need to make sure that our rec centers are open as late as possible, that we've got robust summer jobs programs, paid internship programs during the year, earn and learn opportunities in our schools so that the young people in Providence can see a future for themselves, see a pathway for themselves to a good job and a career and a life in Providence.
Okay. Mr. Cuervo?
Yes, people all over the city remind me that they want effective, accountable policing. I was part of the team that rolled out community policing with Dean Esserman almost 19 years ago, and I can tell you this, the reason why that program was so effective at the time initially was because there was a lot of federal grants that came in that paid for a lot of overtime. And what happens is that when you have new officers that come in and they're walking beats, eventually those officers want to move up in the ranks or they want to make more money with overtime. And that was how they were kept walking those beats for a longer period of time. When those additional funding sources dried up, those folks moved on. They moved on to other positions. We can learn those lessons, and we can apply a community policing model today that's very similar and that's sustainable by getting people, as Brett said, to agree to sign on to specific districts for a longer period of time. In terms of staffing, we're actually in heading towards a normalized level of staffing after a severe dip. And finally, we have to invest in our youth. We have to invest in programming. We have to extend that summer jobs program, which has been very successful year-round. And we also have to invest in improving the programming that we offer at our recreation centers.
Thank you. Ms. LaFortune, what would you do about gang violence?
Right. So I've actually been going in the prisons volunteering since I was in high school. I started going through a program and going into the training schools, and up until the pandemic, every semester I would teach a course, co-teach a course. And when you talk to young people, people in the training school, in the prison, and they share, the challenges when they get out, there aren't any opportunities. We do need a strong community policing model, and I love when I hear community policing, but then there's no definition. That means taking a proactive approach. Having police officers walking the beats, but also defining their role, investing in the communities, and preventative measures. I've been a strong advocate of our youth programs and was an advocate to ensure that it continues on year-round. We need to have better quality schools. We also need to make sure that our rec centers are accessible to everyone through the Arpa funds, which I led the effort to create the task force, which allocated funding. We're going to see investments in our rec centers. But we need to address the root cause of the problem, but also take a preventative, address the violence as well.
Thank you. You mentioned the Arpa funding, which opened up the door, so to speak. So we'll begin with Mr. Cuervo. The city has spent ARPA money, given it to nonprofits for much needed programs. What is going to happen in 3 years when the money is gone? The federal government was rigid about guidelines, and the ARPA money was not to replace city funds. So if you have given money, city money, to a nonprofit that runs an art program, that gives people attorneys to prevent eviction, that does a specific youth program, will the city continue that funding in 3 years?
I think that we have to acknowledge that the city gives money to nonprofits from a number of sources. There's community development block grant money that's channeled through housing and urban development. There's money from the Dexter donation. There are a number of sources. These ARPA funds that have been handed out, I think, have been handed out with the understanding that these are 1 or 2 time funding opportunities. And anybody who's ever been involved in a nonprofit world, as I have been in a number of capacities, knows that nobody turns away money, even if they understand that that money may not be available next year. I think it's an opportunity to invest in organizations and in entities that are doing amazing work. And to the extent that we can continue to be supportive of them, we should be, but understanding that we may not be able to have the same largesse that we had when we were flush with federal money.
Thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune, the same question.
Right. So I actually am the person who introduced legislation to create the task force, because when council leadership decided to allocate the money without a process, that was quite problematic for me. And I also served on the task force. What we were very intentional to ensure that funding is going into initiatives, that a lot of initiatives that currently existed, so that they could scale up some of the work that they're doing, as they also think about some of additional funding through CDBG, also outside grant and philanthropic donations as well. So part of those funding is also, one thing we thought about, is sustainability and ensuring that these programs are able to be sustained. And also we should be working with the state to maximize those funds, especially as it pertains to housing. The city received some infrastructure funds. The state received that infrastructure funds as well, and there's been allocations for housing, so we should be working in collaboration with them to build more affordable housing across the board, and also making investments in programs like youth jobs, mentorship opportunities as well.
Thank you. Mr. Smiley, again, the question goes to the nonprofits who have been so desperate for operating funds, including the community libraries, and what is going to happen in 3 years?
I don't think we know what's going to happen. It depends on the state of the city's budget, the state of the economy at the time. I've had some concern about, these are one-time funds, and would have advocated for more infrastructure or other one-time expenses, because giving out one-time funds that are being used for recurring expenses are going to put future mayor, future council, and ultimately future taxpayers in a tough situation. They're all noble and worthy causes, but these funds will go away. And so I think we should have taken a harder look at finding upgrades to facilities and other one-time expenses that we could transform the landscape of Providence with this once-in-a-lifetime source of funding, because I don't think we can say what exactly is going to happen, and no one's going to want, and as mayor, I'm not going to want to not renew those grants, but it's hard to say whether financially, responsibly, we can make those recurring commitments with city funds once the free federal money is gone.
Thank you. I think it's time now to go to the 2-minute recaps. or however you want to end your. So we'll start with Mr. Cuervo and go to Councilwoman LaFortune and end with Mr. Smiley. And we're doing this in the expectation that the candidates will stay a few more minutes and linger with their audience. There have been some questions where I have suggested that an audience member buttonhole a particular candidate and ask the question of him. It was a specific question, so I'm holding you to good faith to meet your audience. Anyway, let's start with Mr. Cuervo, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the libraries for this opportunity, and all of you for coming out. I know you could be any other place, and you chose to be here listening to us give some responses. You know, when I look out in this audience, I see friends. I see people that I've known, that I've worked with over the years on different issues pertaining to the libraries, pertaining to housing, pertaining to public safety. And that gets me really excited about the future of Providence. There's so much civic engagement here. There are so many people who care. But there are also a lot of people who continue to struggle and who are getting pushed out, as I said at the beginning. We need to close that gap, because that gap impacts everybody. And it impacts those of us who are doing well in different ways, but just as importantly as it impacts people who are affected directly through their quality of life. As a city, we have the opportunity and the resources to realize our full potential and to grow our city's tax base and to ensure equity in everything that we do and help more people rise into the middle class, create more home ownership opportunities, and also build more housing. These are things that can be done. These are not far-fetched ideas. They're being done all over the country. We have models to follow. We have all the tools in place already without having to create additional bureaucracies. I'm the candidate who has the coalition of support, widespread citywide coalition of support, the years of experience both at the city level, the state level, and within the community, working in neighborhoods across the city, and the detailed plans to get work done. You can find those plans at gonzaloforprovidence.com, and my contact information is also on there if you want to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilwoman LaFortune.
Thank you so much, League of Women Voters and the League of Women Voters and Providence Community Libraries, and all of you for being here today. You know, I just was thinking a bit about why I get so passionate about our educational system, because I am a product of our schools, and I do know that without the education that I received, the teachers that supported me, I wouldn't be here. I'm a kid who was undocumented, lead poison survivor, and the only access to an education was through our public schools. We can talk all day about a thriving economy. We can talk all day about safety. We can talk all day about narrowing the equity gap. If we do not invest in our schools and make it better, nothing will ever change in the city. No one will want to invest here, and we're going to have more families who are going to want to move out of the city of Providence. So as the only person who has their children in the schools and a product, and also someone who has a graduate degree, we need a mayor who understands and also has the background to be able to really transform our schools. We need also a mayor who's going to prioritize the things that matter to residents, ensuring that we live in safe communities, ensuring that it's affordable, an honest and open government that works for them. And finally, a mayor who's going to take thoughtful approaches to making investments. You know, when we think about the Arpa funds, those one-type funding to fix our rec centers, we thought about all those things because we wanted to take a strategic approach and make real investments in the city of Providence. As mayor, I will continue to do the work that I have been doing as a city council person, and will continue to partner with our community partners as well as our stakeholders to create a city for our future, because Providence residents deserve that. So thank you. And please go to votenerva.com to learn more about my platform. Thank you.
Mr. Smiley.
Yeah, thank you, Joan, and to everyone from the League, and everyone for coming out tonight. We hit on many of the pressing issues. One of the things we didn't talk in great detail, as referenced once, was the growth of our large nonprofits. Right now in Providence, 40% of the land is tax exempt. 60% of the people pay 100% of the bills, and that number is getting worse, not better. Next year, the next mayor is going to renegotiate the agreement for payments in lieu of taxes with our colleges and hospitals. We talked about the pension tonight. One of the things that's going to happen also next year is our pension costs are going to start to escalate once again. When Mayor Taveras was mayor, there was a limited form of pension reform that was a 10-year freeze in the growth of certain expenses. That expires next year. And we talked about the Arpa funds, these one-time funds that's plugging budget gaps and making it look like we don't have any financial problems at all. All of these things are going to happen in the first term for our next mayor. And we need a mayor who's ready to meet that challenge. After serving in the city and state government with Governor Raimondo, running state government as the director of administration, I'm the only candidate running this year who's ever managed personnel or budgets of this scale. I'm the only one who's ever negotiated a labor contract at the city or state level. I'm confident that I can build a team to meet the challenges that we're going to face to make Providence not just the best run city in the country, but the world-class city we all know it can be. I'm asking for your vote on September 13th. I'm encouraging everyone to go vote early. You can now vote early at 444 Westminster Street, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. The pandemic is still here. Don't risk being quarantined on Election Day. Please consider voting early, and you can learn more at smileyformayor.com. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me add that whoever wins, the City of Providence has won, because we have 3 enthusiastic, committed people who want to be mayor. Rationally, there was one question: why do you want to be mayor? And I thought it was a tongue-in-cheek kind of question. But we are so glad that you have put yourself forward. Let's give them a round of applause.